Esteemed Mr. President Nausėda, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, on behalf of the Körber Foundation, I would like to welcome you to the first Körber Global Leaders Dialogue this year. Dear guests, it is great that so many of you have accepted our invitation, and I am particularly pleased that so many young foreign policy experts are with us today. I believe there are at least two reasons for this. The first reason is that President Nausėda is a highly respected speaker here in political Berlin, whose word carries weight. Secondly, there is a long list of topics for discussion that we as partners in the EU and NATO are preoccupied with now in the 14th month of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Yes, there are indeed many issues to talk about. But let me add one thing from the perspective of a German foundation. Today's event is also about listening. It is about better understanding the Lithuanian view of the historic watershed moment in international politics, which Chancellor Scholz has described as a global Zeitenwende. Listening. When it comes to the concerns, worries, and even warnings of our Baltic neighbors, listening has not always been the central feature of German foreign policy. That has changed, and that is a good thing. And being a person whose family has Baltic roots, it's especially important for me. The Zeitenwende, dear ladies and gentlemen, has triggered a political and strategic shift of emphasis of the EU and NATO towards the East. The Baltic Sea area has become enormously important as a security policy factor. Finland, whose ambassador Anni Sipiläinen I would like to welcome here, has joined NATO, and Sweden will hopefully follow soon. And the Baltic states are once again taking center stage in Europe. As frontrunners in supporting Ukraine, as pace-setters with regard to sanctions, a proposed special tribunal and energy independence from Russia, but also as frontline states. Their geographical position makes them particularly vulnerable. Anyone who has ever taken the train between... We Germans do not only consider it to be our very own interest, but also our obligation to reduce the vulnerability of our Baltic neighbors and to contribute to their security. Their security is also our security, as Defense Minister Pistorius reaffirmed during his recent visit to Lithuania in March. And I would like to add, the more soldiers are there, the more respected are the German. This year, Lithuania takes center stage at the host of the NATO Summit. Holding the alliance top-level meeting in Vilnius, just 40 kilometers from the border with Belarus, is a significant sign of the NATO's unity and resolve. The same goes for the announced participation of the Ukrainian president. In Vilnius, decisions of historic significance are on the agenda. How can Ukraine's struggle for existence be further supported with adequate military material? Is the 2% target still sufficient for this monumental task? And what could Ukraine's NATO membership perspective, recently reaffirmed by Secretary General Stoltenberg in Kiev, actually look like? But the Vilnius summit will not only focus on the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and its consequences for Europe's security. Other challenges, including China's security policy ambitions, will also be on the summit agenda. People in the Baltic states have had a long history of communist Soviet dictatorship, and Lithuania knows what it means to enter into confrontation as a small country with a giant like China. Esteemed Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to be able to discuss these important issues with you today. Our founder, Kurt Körber, was convinced that it is always better to talk to each other rather than about each other. This is also true for friends and partners. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion, the Körber Foundation has been committed to creating spaces for reflection on the future of the European security order. Our neighbors in the Baltic states and in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe are key partners in this process for us. A few weeks ago, we hosted your Latvian counterpart, Egil Slevits. Last December, our Bergedorf Roundtable met in Warsaw. And last September, the annual Munich Young Leaders Meeting, our cooperation project with the Munich Security Conference, took place in Tallinn. And being a foundation sitting in the Hanseatic town of Hamburg, it's very important to speak about this network of very, very tight cooperation. Allow me to make one more remark at the end. For us as a foundation, the Baltic Sea region is much more than just a security policy term. In times of acute threats, it's our task to bring this network even closer together. And with today's event, we would like to contribute to this. We look forward to hearing more from you, Mr. President, about Lithuania's view on the Zeitenwende, the global turning point in history. In keeping with our principle of talking to each other, not about each other, we are grateful that you also agreed to answer questions after your keynote speech. The discussion will be facilitated by Nora Müller, head of our International Policy Division. Please post your questions under the Twitter hashtag KGLD Nausėda, which will also be shown on your screen. And last but not least, I would like to thank Ambassador Romunas Misiulis and his team very much for their excellent cooperation in preparing this event. Labe ačiū. Mr. President, we are very happy to have you with us, and the floor now is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is always a great pleasure for me to return to Germany. I felt the spirit of freedom in this country at the time when I came to the University of Mannheim shortly after Lithuania declared independence. By getting to know Germany's free society and social market economy, it became clear to me what the democratic reforms in my country should look like. And I was determined to be part of this change. Today, I am pleased to welcome you all to this event organized by the Körber Foundation. It is important for me to see that your organization focuses on European foreign and security policy and on the specific challenges of Central and Eastern Europe. These challenges are an immediate concern for Lithuania. Your foundation's work contributes to a better understanding of the countries to the east of Germany and to a more focused and more accurate German foreign policy. Besides, it also strengthens the European Union as a whole. This union, now more than ever, needs strong and determined German leadership. I was personally moved by Chancellor Olaf Scholz's statement on February 27 last year, where he announced the decision to fundamentally reform the country's security and defense policy. The Chancellor recognized the threat to long-term peace in Europe posed by Russia waging a war against Ukraine, and the Chancellor used this geopolitical turning point to justify the necessity of a Zeitenwende, a paradigm shift. This was indeed a speech of historic significance. Today, we closely follow and sincerely welcome Germany's concrete steps to limit Russia's capability, to support Ukraine to expand German defense capabilities, and to strengthen the security of NATO's entire eastern flank. and we welcome these initiatives. In the current situation, however, it is important to recall the lessons of the past decades. We must recognize that our efforts, both bilaterally and at the level of the European Union, our efforts to find a modus operandi with Russia and to prevent new outbreaks of aggression have all failed. The fact is that we, the Western democracies, have recognized the danger far too late. As early as 2007, the Russian president's alarming words at the Munich Security Conference that he was not interested in the post-Cold War security architecture caused quite a stir. And it was just 1 year later when Russia invaded Georgia, and in 2014, Russia occupied Ukraine's Crimea and part of the Donbas region. Russia skillfully used the tools of hybrid warfare and the undecided attitude of the West. For too long, we have tried to convince ourselves that just one more step, one more concession will be enough to prevent Russia from further sliding into tyranny. But here we are dealing with a classical problem. We project our worldviews onto the other side, and we expect the other side to behave in a way that we would consider rational. It is important today to acknowledge that the Russian leadership sees the world from a different perspective, and their thinking is based on different categories. If we, based on our democratic practices, try to avoid unnecessary confrontation, and if we try to find a compromise, Russia regards this just as a sign of weakness. And that just encourages Russia to be even more aggressive. But things cannot go on like this. We have to say goodbye to illusions. We have to realize that Russia is a long-term threat to peace, a threat to security and stability in Europe. It is very important that this was emphasized in the Zeitenwende speech. In the current situation, I see no other way to restore stability and balance in Europe than to ensure Ukraine's victory in this bloody war. There are no red lines, and there cannot be any red lines to achieve this goal. I have seen with my own eyes the change that the German political class has undergone. I therefore very much welcome the fact that German heavy weapons are being delivered to Ukraine. I am firmly convinced that the time will come for fighter aircraft to be delivered too. I'm also pleased with the recent decisions of the European Council concerning the EU's joint procurement of ammunition for Ukraine, and I'm pleased that there will be more funding for the European Peace Facility, which will allow us to provide faster and more efficient assistance to Ukraine. It is necessary to increase the pressure on Russia with a new an 11th package of sanctions. We must consistently strengthen the EU's sanction policy as long as Russia's aggression continues. And we must focus on cooperation, more cooperation with third countries to prevent any circumvention of the sanctions imposed. The issue of Russia's responsibility for war crimes and crimes of aggression is particularly important. The International Criminal Court's decision to issue an arrest warrant for Putin and to establish an international center for the prosecution of crimes of aggression against Ukraine is an important step, a step towards holding Russia accountable. However, continued efforts must be made to establish the special tribunal. Only with an unequivocal and strong reaction we will force Russia to seek agreement. That is why we must act together, and we must act resolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia's main goal remains unchanged: to destroy the European security architecture and thus to undermine the stability that is essential for the long-term prosperity of Europe and the West in general. Ukrainian resistance has bought us time, and it would be most regrettable to waste that time. In the face of existential threats, we must stand together, trust each other, and take decisions that will help repel Russia's conventional and, what is equally important, hybrid attacks. Firstly, we need to invest at least 2% of our GDP in defense, which, by the way, is only a fraction of what European countries spent during the times of the Cold War. This is closely linked to the need to revitalize the European defense industry. And we also need to equip European diplomacy with the capacity to respond to crises and to secure peace and stability by conventional means. Secondly, we need to further reduce our economic and energy dependency on Russia. I think that the era of cheap security and energy blackmail ended at that moment when we in Europe took extremely important decisions regarding energy deliveries and energy supply security. We got through this winter well, but there are more challenges ahead, and we need to be prepared. I'm pleased to say that Lithuania was one of the first countries to completely renounce the import of Russian energy resources, that is, gas, oil, and electricity. This was made possible by early strategic planning and concrete actions, such as the opening of an LNG terminal in Klaipėda in 2014. By the way, I must take this opportunity to express my admiration for the speed with which LNG terminals were built in Germany. And that made it possible now to abandon the use of the Russian gas pipeline. Today, Lithuania, like other European countries, faces the challenges of having to invest more into green energy, not only to protect the climate, but also to become truly independent from external actors. With regard to nuclear energy, we must also remain true to our principles. The Russian state nuclear energy company Rosatom is still active in the EU market. Although this company was involved in Russia's seizure and takeover of the Ukrainian nuclear power plant Zaporizhzhia, and it was also involved in using the nuclear threat as a blackmail instrument. Rosatom was also involved in the construction of the Belarusian nuclear power plant in Ostrovets on the Lithuanian border. There have been documented safety-related incidents at that site, and they pose a real danger to the people of Europe. It is our common duty to prevent another Chernobyl tragedy. Thirdly, it should be emphasized that in the context of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, And in the context of the Zeitenwende, the turning point in history, a strong transatlantic link between Europe and North America becomes all the more important. For many decades, this alliance has been seen as a guarantor for peace, economic freedom, and technological progress. Today, it can be further strengthened through an increase in defense spending and enhanced cooperation to boost defense industry capabilities. Our unity and intensified transatlantic cooperation will enable NATO to maintain its position as the strongest defense alliance in the world. Fourthly, we must further strengthen the foundations of our democracy and our internal markets. At the international level, we must adopt at all times and in all circumstances, adopt a dignified and independent position. We have to speak with one voice and defend our values and principles. One of the most important challenges for us is to preserve a rules-based international order. Therefore, we must consistently advocate for fair competition and against economic coercion. We must stand up for political and economic cooperation with like-minded countries, and we must contribute to strengthening democratic institutions in the world. To strengthen Europe's economic security, industry must be brought back, must be nearshored to Europe. Fifth, we need to be able to respond quickly to unforeseen situations and new conventional and hybrid threats. Lithuania learned an important lesson in 2021. That was when the Belarusian and Russian regimes staged hybrid attacks and redirected and instrumentalized irregular migration flows. At that time, we realized that we need to agree on legal measures at EU level. That is necessary to adequately protect the EU's external borders and also to facilitate the return of irregular migrants, combat disinformation in third countries, and human trafficking. Today, we are committed to building resilience in all areas. This includes strengthening European remembrance policies, fighting Russia's attempts to rewrite history. That includes also developing new educational programs for our students and pupils, and that also includes paying due respect to the memory of the victims of totalitarianism. National Socialism was condemned immediately after the Second World War. However, the crimes of Stalinism and the Soviet regime were not critically assessed in time. And unfortunately, this means that Russia can repeat history. The Bucha massacre shows that the horrors of the Soviet regimes persist to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, after 19 years of NATO membership, we Lithuanians know very well that we can not only use collective security, but that we must also contribute to it. Very soon, in July this year, Lithuania will host the NATO Summit for the first time. We are preparing responsibly for this event, and we are aware of its special significance. We hope the NATO Summit in Vilnius will be a decisive step towards a global Zeitenwende, a global turning point that will secure defense capabilities in the transatlantic area and deter potential adversaries. We expect that an ambitious new agreement on increased defense spending can be reached in Vilnius. Lithuania this year has increased its national defense spending to a level of 2.552% of its GDP. We hope that within NATO we'll be able to agree on a minimum level of defense spending at 2% of the country's GDP. It is also reassuring that we will officially welcome Finland as a member of the alliance at the summit. I still hope that a decision on Sweden's membership will also be taken in time. These countries will strengthen NATO and also significantly improve the security situation in the Baltic Sea region. Recent years have shown that an independent and democratic Ukraine, ready to fight for its freedom and our European values, is essential for stability and lasting peace in the Euro-Atlantic space. This means, first and foremost, that Ukraine's future lies in the European Union. I welcome the historic decisions of the European Union to grant candidate status to Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and the Western Balkan countries. By the same token, Ukraine's future lies in NATO. Already now, we need a strengthened political dialogue between NATO and Ukraine. I hope that we will take a step in this direction already this summer in Vilnius. We must also seriously consider Russia's intentions and capabilities. The situation remains threatening, and therefore we must continue to increase the military presence of the alliance in the Baltic states. That is necessary to ensure effective deterrence. Ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that today you will hardly find a more sincere ally and partner for Germany anywhere in Europe than Lithuania. We greatly appreciate Germany's strong commitment and leadership role in our region. The German-led battalion of the NATO's enhanced forward presence, our long-term investments in military infrastructure, and our cooperation in defense procurement strengthens not only Lithuania's security, it also strengthens Germany's security. The implementation of the agreement I signed with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz remains our common priority. Last year, we agreed on the deployment of a German brigade in Lithuania. That would be a very important step towards effective deterrence. For that purpose, we are currently expanding our capacities in terms of infrastructure, warehousing, equipment provision, and military training. In the context of the global Zeitenwende, we are ready to further strengthen bilateral cooperation in a variety of ways and areas. I'm pleased to say that Germany is now one of Lithuania's closest economic partners, our most important export market and the largest investor in our country. It is in our common interest to bring industry back to Europe in order to strengthen Europe's economic security. Lithuania is already well integrated into the production chains of the German automotive industry. We hope that more German companies will take the decision to expand their business activities in Lithuania. I have no doubt that our bilateral economic relations have not yet exhausted their full development potential. It is no coincidence that Germany is Lithuania's most important partner today in science, innovation and technology. That is to say, in those areas where we expect major breakthroughs to be achieved in the future. We would like to further develop these relationships, especially in the life sciences, in geosciences, renewable energies and hydrogen research. Today, we are also exploring new perspectives in the semiconductor sector, where a partnership with Germany is of great importance to us. Lithuania can offer its expertise in rapid digital transformation to Germany. In 3 decades, we have managed to establish a strong information and communication technology sector. We managed to become a competence center, a center of excellence for fintech, cyber security, e-business and e-government solutions. I consider it very important for Lithuania and Germany to cooperate in developing a long-term strategy in the interest of European competitiveness. This includes strengthening the internal markets, the technological and industrial base, and removal of existing unnecessary barriers to the movement of goods, services, and private capital. We must pay special attention to promoting international partnerships with the Global South. Ladies and gentlemen, I have no doubt that Germany has a vital role to play in building the Europe of the future. We all need a strong and determined Europe, a Europe that we can be proud of. In Lithuania, we see, we appreciate, and we respect Germany's current efforts to take responsibility for our common security. Lithuania is ready to actively support Germany in achieving these goals. Allow me to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Lieber Herr Präsident, dear Mr. President, thank you very much for a comprehensive take on the global Zeitenwende. We decided to do this in English so that it's a bit more comfortable for the both of us. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll start with a conversation here on stage. Later on, you're welcome to chime in, both our viewers here in the room and also those following us online. Please do use the hashtag #KGLD_Nausėda to post your questions. Now, Mr. President, I wanted to start with a question on something that you have repeatedly said, and that is that there shouldn't be any red lines when it comes to our military support to Ukraine. And from your point of view, you said that loud and clear on several occasions. This obviously also includes fighter jets for Ukraine. Now, as I understand it, tomorrow you'll be meeting with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who is on record saying, and I'm quoting, "The question of combat aircraft does not arise at all. I can only advise against entering into a constant competition to outbid each other when it comes to weapons systems." So, how are you going to convince Olaf Scholz?
I think this is a process, and in the very beginning, sometimes it's...
We can switch back to German.
This is a problem because
like.
I told you that it's a problem to switch. I don't know, it has to do with structure of the brain, but for me it's really a big challenge to switch from one language to another, but probably I will manage it in a few minutes. But anyway, going back to this position regarding the delivery of weapons, I remember February of last year. I remember the initial initial idea to deliver life jackets, helmets, and something similar, but not weapons. And then I was a witness to see how fast this attitude has changed. And now we are in the process of crossing red lines, one after other. And I hope that understanding of all of us will come, that the more decisive we are, the more ready we are to provide all the necessary support to Ukraine, the shorter will be this war. And what does it mean, shorter war? Each day of this war means casualties, destroyed infrastructure, broken lives, human lives, and this is really pity to follow what is happening in Ukraine. So we have to be decisive, we have to be united. No, nobody is talking about a competition, who is better. Lithuania cannot compete with Germany in providing the military support to Ukraine because we are not a very big country. But if you will ask Ukrainians, what do they think about the support of Lithuania? They will say that Lithuania was the first to deliver Stingers 2 weeks ahead of the war. And afterwards, we try to do our best in order to deliver what we can. Of course, we have limited resources, but we are ready to provide the support despite all these restrictions. And I hope very much that we will find these common solutions and what is absolutely necessary. We have to be united, and we have to find, not to go 27 ways, but to find one way to go. And this is absolutely necessary for Ukraine. I'm not talking only about military support, I'm talking about political, economic support. Even the issue of NATO perspectives is a matter of common understanding. And if there will be not common denominator, we will not find a solution. It would be, of course, very pity to see that we cannot unite us and to find a solution.
Let me jump in here, if I may, Mr. President, because I wanted to ask you, in fact, about NATO and the NATO perspective for Ukraine. Our German Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, is again on record saying that the door is open a crack, but this is not the time to decide now when it comes to a more concrete perspective.
May I interrupt you?
Let me just, if I may, finish the question. So, and it's not only Berlin that we hear these type of noises coming out of. The Americans also don't seem to be super happy when it comes to granting map to the Ukrainians in Vilnius. So I was wondering what you think, what can be a realistic expectation from the Vilnius Summit when it comes to a signal of this nature to Ukraine?
Yes, what is absolutely necessary, we have to manage our expectations. And of course, I know that expectations of our colleagues, friends in Ukraine are very high. And as I mentioned, it's very important to find the decisions. But we cannot repeat 15 years in a row that the doors of NATO are open for Ukraine. You cannot do this because Ukrainians ask us, okay, the doors are open. Please show us where are these doors, because we cannot find them. And this is the reason why we would support the idea to send some additional signal. We are not talking about full-fledged membership of Ukraine being in the midst of the war, but we are talking about the signals, what might happen in case the war is over. What could be closer political cooperation with Ukraine right now, between NATO and Ukraine. And we will have the conference subject in Vilnius specially dedicated to the cooperation of Ukraine with NATO. So I have my hopes. And I think that we will achieve this critical mass of understanding. This is not only about military support. This is very important to find some political solutions which could increase, strengthen the fighting spirit of this nation. They have enormously high fighting spirit, but they need some positive stimulus coming from our side in order to survive, in order to continue successfully this war. This is most important.
And this is certainly an aim that we all can subscribe to. I wanted, first of all, to reserve enough time for your questions and comments, ladies and gentlemen, here in the room, but also add one more question, which is also related to Ukraine, but it also refers to China. We've all heard the comments by the Chinese ambassador to Paris about the status of the countries formerly under Soviet occupation. And we also know that this gentleman is known as a sort of notorious provocateur. And the question is whether what we've heard coming out of Paris was just a diplomatic faux pas, or whether you think that it's reflective of China's position. Now today, the much-awaited call between President Xi Jinping of China and President Zelensky has happened. So my question to you, I guess, would be, how do you assess this whole thing? Do you think that China is still prepared to play some form of constructive role when it comes to efforts to help end the war in Ukraine?
Probably I will not comment this statement because it was already officially denied by official Beijing. So probably we have to concentrate on other statements. And yes, I think that China may play a positive role in this conflict, but only with one precondition. China does not interfere and does not support Russia. If it is the case, they could play the positive role of moderator. But now, unfortunately, this is not the case. And we have the evidence, at least absolutely clear evidence, is that so far China has not condemned the war of Russia against Ukraine. So if you keep this strange stance or attitude towards this war, it's very difficult to create this trust of Ukrainians that China may play the role of moderator. But maybe having in mind this recent conversation of President Zelensky with President Xi, maybe there might be some positive changes, positive shifts. But as I mentioned, China has to be absolutely clear about its intentions. If it is not the case, I don't believe that they can play a positive role. Yes, negotiations, peace negotiations are important, but so far, we cannot make the deals on behalf of Ukrainians because they are this is their homeland. And we cannot make any territorial concessions for the peace on their behalf or at the cost of territorial integrity of Ukraine. This is very important to understand, and I think that we will understand that both sides are talking about the peace, but Ukraine is occupied, not Russian Federation. And so I think the normal negotiations can start only with one precondition. Territorial integrity of Ukraine is restored. If it is the case, maybe we can proceed further.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Before I open it up for questions and comments from the audience, I have one final question for you, knowing full well that you have a hobby, and that hobby is collecting antique books. Now, a little thought experiment for you. You can get an original edition of one of 3 books. Now, I tell you which are those books. First is Karl Marx, Das Kapital. Second, Niccolo Machiavelli, Il Principe, or third, Thomas More, Utopia. Which one do you pick?
First edition of Nicholas Machiavelli. First edition of Nicholas Machiavelli. Although I know that Capital, first edition of Karl Marx Capital, was sold in one of the auction houses in Germany for I think 70,000 euros.
Good deal. Okay, so you picked Machiavelli.
I didn't buy it.
Okay, so Il Principe is yours then. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a good moment to open this for your questions, your comments. I do see some raised hands already.
Und ich sehe schon.
Mic is coming up to you, and there are also some questions, thank you very much, from our viewers online. Let me just remind you to be as brief and as concise as you can. Please remember that every question should ideally end with a question mark, and please do let us know who you are and what your affiliation is with. And I see the lady here in the third row over here. Yes. The mic is coming. If you could just wait for a second, the mic is on its way.
Could you hear the rest?
Now I hear.
Okay. Yeah, I'm writing my master thesis. I'm studying international relations, and I come from Georgia. And this is a spectacularly amazing platform to thank you for your continued support. It is important for us, for those who are not, who not share the views of our current government. And I wanted to ask you, what is your realistic expectation, political correctness aside, what do you think is going to happen? And please include the prospect for South Caucasus, if you can, in your answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the interesting question. I recently met the president of Georgia, Salome Zurabishvili, in Vilnius. I received here. And yes, some processes going on in Georgia are not very welcome. I will speak frankly. But I think you have very strong civil society. And this is a hope that we have to support the civil society, and probably we can go forward, because this is very important not to lose this momentum Georgia won in last year. Because we took very historical decisions regarding the candidate status towards Ukraine and Moldova, but the European perspective for Georgia was provided too. But since then, on the one hand, we see the implementation of necessary reforms, especially judiciary reform could be named. But on the other hand, some rhetoric, anti-Western rhetoric, sometimes open anti-Western rhetoric from Georgian government is very difficult to understand. It's controversial. And yes, I hope very much that we will return to the path of integration. And Lithuania is one of the most enthusiastic supporters of Eastern Partnership countries and enlargement of European Union as a whole. But of course, much should be done by Georgian authorities too, with support of civil society. Caucasus situation is very complicated, and I recently welcomed the president of Armenia in Vilnius, and next month I will receive President Aliyev, president of Azerbaijan. I try to be neutral in this situation where Azerbaijan and Armenia cannot find this common understanding and they cannot solve the conflicts. But we have to listen, first of all, what is happening, try to understand what is going on, because both sides are talking sometimes absolutely different statements. And, you have to be very good specialist, expert in the field in order to understand what might be the real situation, because we have two versions of the situation. And I hope very much that European Union not only may, but should play a much larger role in a resolution of this conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. and to pay more attention to difficult geopolitical situation, because we have to involve also other countries of the region. Turkey is playing an active role. Iran is starting to play larger and larger role. And this is very important to find peaceful solutions of the conflict, because otherwise it will become one more hot topic in the region, and we have to avoid it.
Thank you for your question. And again, in the spirit of sort of not sticking too much to diplomatic language, I have a question from Twitter, which comes from Benjamin Tallis with DGAP, the German Council for Foreign Relations. And he writes, Lithuania takes a strong stance to win the systemic competition between democracies and autocracies. And a good example is, of course, Russia and China. So the question for you is, Mr. President, is Germany, from your point of view, doing enough to help win that systemic competition?
We could, and we would like to see more, but I try always to understand the situation in the field. Yes, for Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, it's pretty clear, because we still have the fresh memory what happened 30 years ago. As we were supported by one small country, Iceland. This country recognized us first diplomatically. And we are still very grateful for this country, because they have broken the ice. And right now, I think this is in our minds and in our hearts, to support the fight of other freedom-loving nations, like Taiwan, like Ukraine. And this is the reason why we are extremely dedicated and engaged into this issue. I know that situation in Germany is a little bit different, and you have different opinions. Even sociological polls show that German society is divided. There is a part which is probably neutral to this conflict in Ukraine. There is a part who tries to understand Russia. There is a part of population which is really supporting Ukraine from the bottom of the heart. And for politicians, in order to hear and to react to those public attitudes, it's sometimes quite difficult to come to the tough decisions, because they have to keep attention or to understand the society better and to reflect the mood of the society. This is the reason why, from the standpoint of Lithuania, yes, probably I would say, frankly, we could and we want to expect more, but we have to understand also the situation here in Germany, because Germany is not equal to Lithuania. Different experience, different size, different groups of population. This should be kept in the mind in order to make the final conclusions.
So Germany can do more when it comes to...
I think it can do more, and I'm pretty sure that it will do more. Like this story with weapons. You started from low
helmets, 5,000
level,
helmets.
Now you are there. And tomorrow you will be even there.
So you trust in Germany's capability?
I trust in the dynamic.
Fantastic. I see more raised hands, and Frau Fink-Krämer has been very patient. You have the floor.
I'm a former member of parliament for the Social Democratic Party. And I can see that in Belarus and in Russia, many people do not agree to the war in Ukraine. And especially when it comes to men that are about to be conscripted, those people, those men try to leave Russia or Belarus so that they won't be conscripted and sent to Ukraine. And they don't want to support the war in Ukraine based on Belarus. What can Lithuania do? What can Germany do so that these men and women will not be forced to support the war, because the less people Belarus and Russia have to go to war, the less they will be capable of aggressive behavior.
A question, and I would start from saying that we should not be misled by the fact that some people don't want to go to fight in Ukraine as a sign that they are against the Putin's regime. They don't want to fight. They don't want to lose their lives on the battlefield. But they are supporting Putin. And this is quite broad phenomena in Russian Federation. That yes, people are fleeing, going to Georgia, going to European Union, going, by the way, to Baltic countries too. They find the jobs, they start the business there. But if you talk with them, you will not hear any words of condemnation of this war. They do not condemn the war. And this is sometimes difficult to understand. Belarus is another story. And in Belarus, it's probably a little bit different situation, because we know very well that about 80% of the population does not agree that Belarus steps into the war with Ukraine and sends military forces to the territory of Ukraine. 80%. This is not the case in Russia. I think 70 or 75% of population in Russia supports the war and supports that Putin is fighting in Ukraine. But yes, Belarusian society is suppressed, and probably right now it's not possible to see what is the mood or what is the attitude of the civil society, because the civil society is underground. And Lukashenko did a lot in order to consolidate this regime and to put Belarusian society down. So I think that yes, we should support any attempt of Russian society to withstand this Putin's regime pressure, but sometimes it's difficult to see whether there is opposition in Russian Federation. I think there is no opposition anymore, because all opposition leaders are already abroad. And I think they started the process against one last opposition leader right today. Yes, it was the process started against the mayor of Yekaterinburg. He was probably the last remaining opposition leader in the Russian Federation, because they methodically and consistently destroyed the opposition in the last 3-4 years. This was a very deliberate policy of Russian regime.
I think we have time for one more very crisp and concise question, and our colleague in the red jacket is next. The mic is coming to you.
Labą dieną. Roberta iš Šiaulių. Išvirda gerne meine Frage auf.
Can I ask, my question is Lithuanian, but obviously we have no interpreter, so I'm going to ask in German. Last time we met in Chile in 2018. At that time I was still studying there, and you were not yet president. You were at the university there, and I asked you a question when you gave a performance in the library.
Yeah.
Now, ever since then, I've been following your career. Like you, I got a DAD scholarship, and now I am currently doing an internship in German Parliament. There's also another colleague from Lithuania with me, and it was rightfully said that today we have many young people here in the room, the future global leaders maybe. And so therefore my question to you is, what is your advice to the young generation? And what would you tell me to do next? I've done everything, everything you did, I did the same. So you need an advice from the president.
In mind that in 1994, I have studied in Bonn University. At that time, the capital of Germany was Bonn. And I think that was a decision, a historical decision taken to remove to Berlin. And I was also had my practicum in Bundestag at that time, in Bonn. And I remember in which bureau was it? It was the bureau of a social democratic politician, Ernst Schwanhold. And you know, I can say to you that if you will follow my example, let's say in 20 years you will become the president of Lithuania.
What a fantastic note to end this conversation on. Dear Mr. President, thank you very much for making so much time to be with us today. Thank you all for following our invitation. I think this was a very good example of talking to each other rather than about one another. We learned a lot about Lithuania's take on the global Zeitenwende, also a little bit about old books, and we look forward to having you with us again here in Berlin, Mr. President. Let me also add some very cordial thank yous, especially to Ambassador Misiolis and his fantastic team here at the embassy in Berlin, to our hosts here at the Allianz Forum, to our interpreters and our technicians, of course, to our colleagues at Beisel von Mathieu, who helped us implement this event, and most of all, of course, to my fantastic team here at the Körber-Stiftung in Berlin. Please do stick around for a little bit, join us for a glass of wine, and thank you there, and thank you again.
Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you. Das war wirklich ein Vergnügen.
It was really a pleasure to be with you.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Thank you very much, and have a good stay in Berlin.